potential trap game. It's going to be on October 11th. Look out for that game before Florida State travels. Not travels. They play at home versus Notre Dame. And Notre Dame, honestly, Notre Dame's a lot better than Clemson this year, and they could totally expose Florida State if they don't get their act together. So circle that game on your calendar. It'll probably be a game day, game of the week on October 18th. Notre Dame visits Tallahassee to play the Seminoles. That'll be very interesting at best. So now, going back to the rankings for college football, who deserves that number one ranking? A lot of people think Alabama does, but honestly, Alabama did not look good in the first half versus Florida. And Florida's a team, you have to remember, went 4-8 last season. They're still picking it up. And Alabama's played at West Virginia. I don't know. I don't think they've done enough either to deserve the number one ranking. In my opinion, the number one ranking should go to Oregon because they have the best victory of any team we can think of, beating Michigan State, absolutely destroying them in the second half to win 46-27. I think right now, Oregon should deserve that number one ranking, despite the slip up to beat Washington State 38-41. And we got to circle our calendars. It's going to be a great game. UCLA, Oregon, at the Rose Bowl on October 11th. That is going to be one of the best games of the college football season. UCLA, a lot of people had written them off, but you saw how good they looked versus Arizona State. 62 points on the road. This could be the game, the make-or-break game in the Pac-12 this season.
Yeah, definitely. I think it'll be a lot of fun to watch that. And the rest of the games, we are going to now... We talked about, I think, Florida State a good deal during that segment. So we don't really have to talk about how, if they can keep playing the mediocre play. I think we've addressed that during that little segment right there. So we're going to go to the top four teams in the country. And I'll start. I think you still put Florida State in there. Oregon. Alabama's undefeated. The number 4 team. It's a tricky one. I think a lot of people like Oklahoma. I'm going to go with Notre Dame. I like what Notre Dame has done. Sure, they haven't played anybody really out of this world, but then again, neither have Oklahoma or Alabama. It hasn't been out of this world. Alabama gets Ole Miss, which we'll talk about in a second. But I like Notre Dame right now to be the 4th spot after that year out. I think Everett Golston has just shown what a good quarterback he is and what a difference he makes for this Notre Dame team. So I put him in at my number 4 spot. Blake, who are your top 4?
Top 4 right now, got to go number 1, Oregon, number 2, Alabama, number 3, Oklahoma, and number 4, Florida State, just because they're undefeated. But honestly, it's been ugly, and I really hope the team can get it around. Some sneaking little suspicion, call me a sidekick, but honestly, right now, I see Florida State still going undefeated this season, but I see them kind of similar to, and no, you're going to hate on me for this, similar to that 2006 Ohio State team, which cruised through the regular season only to get pummeled by a Florida team that had 2 losses. I see that happening. It's just the way Jameis has taken the season so far, it's as if he thinks it's like a video game or something where he can just do whatever when he's off the field. I don't know.
It's tough to remember Florida and Ohio State.
Painful memories.
We had 2 straight losses to them in national championships. We had a year where we lost to them in basketball and football at the same time. They're our kryptonite. But, Florida State, they've got some time to turn it around, luckily. Still, hasn't looked good. So we're going to jump over now to looking at the next 4 of the big games. So we're just going to make our picks for Bama, Ole Miss, Texas A&M against Mississippi State, Stanford versus Notre Dame, and USC versus ASU. Starting with Bama, Ole Miss, I've got to go with Bama here, but I think Ole Miss will put up a fight. I think that is my upset watch, definitely. Actually, no. Unless you consider Notre Dame versus Stanford, with Notre Dame winning an upset. But between the rankings kind of system for an upset, I've got to go Bama here, but Ole Miss, an upset potential team. Texas A&M against Mississippi State. I like what Kenny Hill has done. I like Texas A&M right now to come up with a win. Notre Dame against Stanford. I like Notre Dame to keep going. I like Everett Golston. Sure, Stanford's a really good team, but I think Notre Dame can pull it off here. And then USC versus ASU. You know what? The fact that Arizona State isn't ranked in the top 25 is kind of crazy right now. I think they got pummeled by UCLA in that second half. They played well in the first half, and they've played well up until this point this season. But I think USC gets the win, and I think USC... Sure, they lost to Boston College, but I still think they're a good team.
Oh, it's an ugly loss.
I still think they're a good team. I think Cody Kessler is doing it right. I think Sarkisian has made just a big impact on this team compared to last year, which was just so tough at the beginning of the year. I really like what he's done for USC, and I don't think they're a championship contender just yet, but I think as we move forward, we've got Juju, of course, Adoree Jackson, the wide receiver lineage continues. Of course, we had Marquise Lee, Robert Woods this year, Aguilar. I think it's going to have a couple more years of those talented wide receivers being the catalysts, I guess you could say, for this Trojan team. But I like USC to pick up a win here against Arizona State. Blake, what are your picks?
Yeah, so I'm going to start with the game that you just left off at, USC and Arizona State. I think this USC team is kind of out to prove itself because although they got in the top 10 relatively quickly with their impressive victory at Stanford and also blowing out Fresno State, they kind of got too much hype too early on, and they were a little nervous, and I think that's what happened on a road game, a trap game in Boston College. Ugly loss now, like I said. Boston College lost at home to Colorado State this weekend, so really doesn't help the Trojans' resume at all. But with that being said, I think they're out to prove themselves. You saw them blow out Oregon State. I think Arizona State's a little better than Oregon State, but not much better. I mean, that was an ugly loss to UCLA. I see USC winning comfortably here at home on a Saturday night at the Coliseum. Moving on to the next game, really interesting one. Texas A&M, who barely escaped Arkansas at the Jerry Bowl in Arlington, Texas. They're going to be playing at Mississippi State, a team that really nobody's giving any credit so far. This is a Mississippi State team that has been playing very well, gone under the radar, beat LSU in LSU 34-21. I see Texas A&M getting upset here because last week they had to use all their strength in the game versus Arkansas where they weren't really expecting to be in a dogfight. They're going to be going on the road in Starkville. I see them getting upset here. So that's my upset pick. And the other one, Alabama, Ole Miss. As much as I want to go with Ole Miss here, Alabama traditionally wins these games against unproven foes in the SEC on the road. They're just so good against SEC opponents. I don't see them losing here in this game. I see Nick Saban and his crew pulling through and getting their first quality victory of the season. Notre Dame taking on Stanford. Luckily, they get to play at home because if they're playing on the road, I think they might get upset. But now they're playing at home. This is really similar, their situation so far this season, to the 2012 season when they reached the BCS National Championship game. This team has something methodical about them. Their offense has looked great so far. Their defense has looked really good. The schedule is really daunting, but so far they've been able to handle it, and I think they take care of business for Stanford. So those are my picks for this week in college football. We're going to take our second commercial break, and then we'll come back with the NFL. Lots of stuff to talk about there. Anything else, Noah, before we take our second commercial break here?
No, just stick with us. We're going to be back with NFL, which I'm pretty sure everybody's excited to talk about after a great Sunday.
Yeah.
Welcome back into Blake and Noah LA2 Chicago episode 4, our final segment of the night before we go into the Say What segment of the night. And we're going to be talking a little NFL. I'm sure that's what everybody wants to talk about right now. Of course, the number one sport in the NFL. We're going to start with a quick score rundown, starting with the Packers and the Bears. After a tight first half, Packers pulled away 38-17. We also have the Texans defeating the Bills at home 23-17. Bills dropping their last two. Colts over Titans 41-17. We had the Ravens. Steve Smith playing against his old team 38-10. Steve Smith, a great day, 139, 2 touchdowns. The Lions winning at the Meadowlands 24-17 over the Jets. We had the Buccaneers defeating the Steelers on a last-second touchdown against the Steelers, of course. And the Raiders in London against the Dolphins. The Dolphins got the win. The Raiders technically the hosts, but really no home team there. The Chargers against the Jaguars. Chargers took care of business, 33-14 to go to 3-1. In a game filled with miscues, the 49ers defeated the Eagles 26-21. The Vikings took down the Falcons 41-28. And in the Thursday night game, the Giants, led by Larry Donnell, won 45-14. Now we head over to the game in action right now. The Cowboys lead the Saints in what could be an upset, 31-3. What a performance so far from these Dallas Cowboys. They've just absolutely dominated this New Orleans Saints team. The Cowboys used to being a bad defensive team, but this has been quite the performance as they look to go to 3-1 and send the Saints to 1-3. So, now we're going to start off with the big rivalry of the day and just some quick thoughts. We'll also Bears versus Packers. Then we'll go into the Eagles and the Niners, both me and Blake's favorite teams. And we're going to start with Blake really quickly. Bears, Packers, what are some of your thoughts?
Before I get to that, I'm just going to name down the best quality performers today, brought to you by Edge. Andrew Luck today, great fantasy performance, 29 for 41, 393 yards, 4 touchdowns. DeMarco Murray so far tonight, 17 carries, 126 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And then Steve Smith, like you said, playing versus former team, 7 receptions, 139 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So those were the quality performances. And then now moving on to a little bit of a different topic. Noah, as much as we want to talk about how great the Cowboys have been so far, but what is wrong with the New Orleans Saints? If this result holds, they'll fall to 1-3 on their season, and their only victory being a victory at home versus the Minnesota Vikings. They lost at Cleveland, they lost at Atlanta, which is somewhat jeopardized now because Atlanta looks like they're getting their act together, but at Cleveland and at Dallas, two teams who are not expected to do very well. They're going to fall to 1-3, and then next week they'll get to play Tampa Bay. But what is wrong with the Saints? I mean, this was a team that was expected to win the division this year.
Well, the Vikings, they took a loss to, the Vikings, they beat Atlanta today. So Atlanta still has some unresolved issues. Look, they've played 3 of their 4 games on the road, which has something to do with it. But their schedule is a tough schedule from here on out. These were the wins they needed to take care of. Tampa Bay, that should be a win, but seeing how they played, it's nothing for sure, though they did win their first home game. But they're going to get Detroit on the road after the bye. They're going to have Green Bay at home, Carolina away, San Francisco, Cincinnati, Baltimore, Pittsburgh, Carolina, Chicago, all in a row. It's brutal for this Saints team, and they haven't looked good. They haven't been able to stop opposing offenses. Except for Minnesota, every game they've allowed at least 26 points. The defense is the problem, and they broke the bank for Jarris Byrd, and now they're not going to be able to afford to bring back some of their big-time defensive players for next year. New Orleans, they got to get their act together because this team, their defense could be going from bad to worse next year. This is one of the few shots they'll have. They have to get it right. It's been a tough start for this New Orleans Saints team.
And then on the other side of the ball, you got the Dallas Cowboys. I mean, everybody kind of, after the San Francisco game, everybody wrote them off. They're like, okay, this team is crap, just like we thought they were. But honestly, they go on the road, beat down Tennessee 26-10, and then barely edge out the Rams. But then tonight's performance, just outstanding job by DeMarco Murray and Tony Romo teaming up on offense. Also the defense, got to give them lots of credit. And then if you look at their schedule, if they win tonight, they're going to go 3-1, and then next week play a home game versus the Houston Texans, the rivals in the state of Texas. I see them winning that game too. So possibly going 4-1 before their Week 6 matchup at the Seahawks. So quite an outstanding start for the Cowboys, considering the way that they look versus the Niners on Week 1.
Yeah, I think the real test comes later on in the year. Starting Week 9 when they get Arizona, they'll also have to go away at New York. They'll have to take on the Eagles, the Bears, then the Eagles again away from home, and the Colts. That's the real test for them after this little stretch to begin the year. The question is, can Tony Romo get it done? Can this team get it done? Romo's had a pretty decent start to the year, but I still think this team is shaky. 2 big wins, but I've got to say I still think that the Eagles are the best team in this division. But Dallas has looked pretty good, to say the least. So now moving over to Packers versus Bears. Blake, this, of course, one of the oldest rivalries in football. Just some quick thoughts.